There is a quiet fear that many people carry without ever naming it. It does not always announce itself through panic or tears. It often hides behind smiles, generosity, late night messages, and the constant urge to stay connected. It is the fear of being forgotten. For some people, this fear is even stronger than the fear of being alone. They would rather stay in unhealthy relationships, tolerate emotional distance, or exhaust themselves trying to matter to others than face the possibility of fading from someone's memory. At first, this fear does not look dramatic. It looks like checking your phone more often than you want to admit. It looks like rereading old conversations. It looks like wondering whether someone still thinks about you when you are not around. It looks like feeling uneasy when friendships grow quieter or when people move on to new phases of life. It feels like standing in a crowded room and still wondering if anyone would notice if you disappeared. For many people, this fear begins early in life. It often develops in environments where love, attention, or emotional safety felt inconsistent. Maybe affection came and went. Maybe praise was rare. Maybe being noticed required achievement, obedience, or emotional labor. When care feels conditional, a child learns something dangerous. That connection is fragile, and visibility is something that must be earned. In these environments, children often adapt by becoming hyper-aware of others' moods, needs, and expectations. They learn to perform emotional usefulness. They learn to be easy, helpful, funny, strong, or understanding. They learn that being memorable means being valuable. And slowly, they begin to associate being remembered with being safe. Over time, this becomes part of their emotional blueprint. They grow into adults who measure their worth by how much space they occupy in other people's minds. Being liked is not enough. Being cared about is not enough. They need to feel irreplaceable. They need reassurance that they matter, that they are significant, that their absence would be noticed. This fear is not rooted in vanity. It is rooted in emotional survival. When someone grows up feeling invisible, forgotten becomes synonymous with abandoned. Forgotten means unprotected. Forgotten means unimportant. Forgotten means unsafe. So in adulthood, they develop patterns that revolve around maintaining emotional presence. They are often the ones who remember birthdays, check in regularly, initiate conversations, and hold space for others' struggles. They are emotionally generous, sometimes to the point of self-neglect. They become reliable, dependable, available. But underneath this generosity, there is often anxiety, a quiet question that never fully disappears. Will you still care if I stop trying? Because for them, relationships do not feel stable. They feel like something that must constantly be maintained. If communication slows, worry grows. If affection shifts, fear activates. If someone becomes distant, self-blame begins. They wonder what they did wrong. They analyze their words. They replay conversations. They search for mistakes. They assume responsibility for emotional changes that were never theirs to carry. And this leads to another painful pattern: overextending. They give more than they have. They compromise more than feels healthy. They tolerate emotional imbalance. They stay in connections that drain them. They accept crumbs of attention. They convince themselves that something is better than nothing, because being half remembered feels safer than being forgotten entirely. This fear also affects how they handle conflict. They avoid expressing needs. They minimize hurt. They forgive too quickly. They silence themselves to preserve connection. They choose harmony over honesty, even when it costs them emotional authenticity. On the outside, they appear calm, supportive, and emotionally intelligent. On the inside, they are often exhausted from managing everyone else's comfort while neglecting their own. Another common trait is emotional monitoring. They pay close attention to subtle shifts in tone, energy, or response time. A delayed reply can trigger insecurity. A shorter message can feel like rejection. A canceled plan can feel like evidence of disposability. These reactions are not irrational. They are trauma-informed. They come from early experiences where emotional availability was unpredictable. The nervous system learned to scan for signs of disconnection because disconnection once meant emotional danger. So now, even minor changes can activate old fears. There is also often a deep sensitivity to endings. Goodbyes feel heavy, distance feels threatening, growing apart feels personal. Even natural life transitions can feel like emotional losses. When friendships fade, they grieve intensely. When relationships end, they struggle not only with heartbreak, but with identity confusion. If someone no longer remembers them the same way, who are they now? Because much of their self-concept is built around relational significance. They know who they are through the eyes of others, through being someone's favorite person, someone's emotional anchor, someone's safe place. And while this makes them deeply empathetic and relationally skilled, it also makes them vulnerable to losing themselves in connection. Sometimes they shape themselves to fit what others need. They adapt personalities. They suppress preferences. They become flexible to the point of invisibility. Ironically, in trying not to be forgotten, they slowly erase parts of themselves. They become remembered for being nice, supportive, always there, but not always for who they truly are. And this creates a quiet loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen. Many people with this fear are surrounded by others and still feel empty. They receive appreciation and still feel insecure. They are loved and still feel replaceable. Because the wound is not about numbers, it is about meaning. They are not afraid of being alone. They are afraid of being insignificant. They are afraid that their presence does not leave an emotional imprint, that once they leave a room, a conversation, or a phase of life, they vanish from memory. This fear also influences how they approach success and achievement. Some become overachievers, hoping accomplishments will secure their place in others' minds. Others become emotional caretakers, believing that being indispensable will make them unforgettable. Both are strategies of self-protection. And both come at a cost. Over time, constantly trying to secure emotional relevance can lead to burnout, resentment, and quiet despair. They may begin to feel used, unappreciated, or emotionally depleted. They may wonder why they give so much and still feel unsure of their value. Healing begins when they slowly realize something radical. Being remembered is not the same as being worthy. Worth does not come from occupying space in other people's thoughts. It comes from existing, from breathing, from feeling, from having an inner life, from being human. This realization is not easy. It requires unlearning years of emotional conditioning. It requires sitting with the discomfort of not performing for approval. It requires letting relationships breathe without constant reassurance. It means learning to ask, who am I when no one is watching? It means practicing self-validation instead of outsourcing it. It means noticing the urge to overgive and gently asking, what do I need right now? It means allowing yourself to take up space without apologizing. It means trusting that healthy connections do not disappear when effort relaxes. People who fear being forgotten often discover through healing that the most meaningful connections are not maintained through anxiety. They are maintained through authenticity. You do not have to exhaust yourself to matter. You do not have to shrink to be remembered. You do not have to suffer to be loved. Your presence is not fragile. Your impact is not temporary. You have already shaped lives in ways you will never fully see. Every conversation that brought comfort, every moment of kindness, every time you listened when someone needed to be heard, every time you showed up with sincerity, those things live on. Even if people move on, even if circumstances change, even if life shifts, you are not erased by distance. You are not invalidated by silence. You are not replaceable because you are unique. And learning to believe that is one of the deepest forms of emotional freedom. When you stop fearing invisibility, you start choosing yourself. You start building relationships from mutual presence instead of emotional survival. You start resting in the knowledge that you are enough, even when no one is actively affirming it. And from that place, connection becomes lighter, healthier, more honest. You begin to relate not because you are afraid of disappearing, but because you genuinely want to share your life. And that is where real belonging begins. Not in being remembered, but in being rooted within yourself.